And we're live and ready to start spelunking around the crypto universe.
And we actually have a name this time around.
We do, we do. I think it's a great name. Have you ever played the indie game? I think it's called
Spelunking.
Spelunky. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've never actually played it myself. I've just watched videos of it, and I think it's like the sort of ambiance seems like it fits the crypto universe very well, where you like jump around, throw a banana, and then sometimes you get demolished by like some trap, and it's very
It's completely random. And every time that you get rugged, you need to start completely from scratch.
it's a great game. I think there's also a really good documentary on building it, if I recall correctly, that I watched a long time ago. But it's like it's it has a lot of like building a small indie game that becomes really popular is actually not very different from building a DeFi project where you're like three guys and then it becomes this multi-billion-dollar thing and all of the same problems. But to get into the topics of this week, or I guess these 2 weeks, I think is our cadence two
Sort of.
weeks? I guess it is. Yeah.
Right now it is.
Okay.
Let's see what it ends up being.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a lot that happens in 2 weeks, turns out. So maybe we can discuss this Vitalik's April Fool's blog post first and then see where we go from there.
Okay. You get that started actually.
So Vitalik on April Fool's Day released this blog post called "In Defense of Bitcoin Maximalism," where he basically I'll paraphrase of what I sort of intuited from this post, and then everyone can go and read it and come to completely other conclusions. But my feeling is that he is basically trying to prepare the Ethereum community to have to defend Ethereum in a much more rigorous kind of way, most likely against regulation, government interference, but also against competition and things like that, I assume. And his argument is sort of that if you compare like a Bitcoin maximalist to an Ethereum maximalist, and you try to imagine which one is most likely to like die in a ball of fire protecting their chain or their values or whatever. Probably the Bitcoin maximalist, right? Like they're like so hardcore, like, weaponized to the teeth, or at least that's the stereotype, right? That they're living in a bunker while the
Yeah.
Ethereum guy is sort of wearing unicorn shirts and thinking about regenerative finance or something like that. And so I think it's sort of like I think he's a little bit worried that because Ethereum is very neutral and kind of positive, that it doesn't have like an immune system in some ways, like Bitcoin does. And you can I don't know, what do you think?
Interesting. I'm sure that I hadn't thought about the way that you interpret it, or that this might just be trying to build an immune system. It might be. I disagree that Ethereum doesn't have maximalists. I mean, if you hear the bankless guys, for instance, they're pretty much diehard apologists that if Ethereum were to go out and start putting babies on spikes, they would start defending this as, oh, it's going to get worldwide population under control, right? They're gonna find some reason why Ethereum putting babies on spikes is good. So there are some Ethereum maximalists out there. What I think might be the main well, there are two key differences there. First is that Bitcoin is older. So maximalism has had a lot more time to ferment in the community, first of all. And second, Bitcoin was more directly threatened by what they see as a shitcoin that outgrew them, which is Ethereum. Now, there's something interesting related to this, and I can't recall when I read this. It was a while ago, but basically there was this theory that the platforms that ended up thriving, that ended up succeeding, were the platforms that basically allowed no compromise and require you to live your entire life inside them. So, for instance, MySpace was happy just being like your music place, and that's it. And maybe like your weirdo photo place. That's it. Flickr doesn't want you to live your entire life there. They just want to have your photos every so often. Google Plus was happy if you knew it existed, whereas Facebook demanded that you live your entire life in Facebook. You're going to be organizing your events here. You're going to be chatting to your friends here. You're going to be posting your friends here. You need to be here forever. And it was actually those platforms that ended up demanding like complete adherence that ended up thriving. And I think that Linux, for instance, is an example of this as well. Like either you were in or you were in. That's it. And that's one of the reasons why Linux thrived. So he might be trying to get something like this going on the Ethereum community as well. Now that there are all the competing chains that are getting some proper traction. Which, by the way, that's one part of my thesis of why it was one part of my thesis of why Solana had a chance of succeeding. Because if you are an EVM compatible chain, then it's very easy for mercenary developers to just deploy your program there and then stop paying attention to your platform when the platform doesn't get enough traction. But if you actually sat down and wrote Rust code for Solana, then now you have a stake on the thing succeeded, because you're not just going to take this back to Ethereum and run it there.
Yeah.
So there might be something of this going on as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's kind of so this question of like, if you've built something for the EVM or built something for something else, right? It is kind of an interesting one, because building for the EVM does have a kind of network effect to it, where like you can easily deploy on so many different chains now. You have a lot of functional bridges to and from these chains. And so there's definitely value in that, right? And there's only a few other sort of smart contract environments, I guess you could call them, where people are deploying anything at all. And Solana is definitely one of them. But even those places tend to be trying to become EVM compatible. So this is sort of a tangent on what we were just discussing, but if I'm a new project, I probably do want to go EVM compatible first. The thing is, though, that doesn't actually benefit the L1s or L2s, right? Like the platforms kind of are in a worse position because the applications can move around so freely, right? So it's interesting, which is what you were, I guess, saying is like, if you've built it for Solana, you've built it for Solana, right? You're not gonna, and it's a lot of work to rebuild it for another environment, and so there's a lot of stickiness. But so that competition, right, is very interesting, and I'd say definitively right now EVM is winning, right? And that might not always be the case. It's in the long arc of history, there's going to be a lot of different things, but for now, it looking at kind of the competitive landscape as like Ethereum versus X, Y, and Z isn't really accurate, because X, Y, and Z typically are running EVM in some format anyway. But that's super fascinating. And from an operational standpoint, something that we've discovered here in like the last year as well, which is sort of pretty invisible maybe to the outside world, is that if you want custody, for example, you want institutional custodians to support your asset. If it's an EVM compatible asset, it's very easy to get custody. They can add support like this. If it's anything else, things get very tricky. Besides Solana and maybe like one or two others. But typically anything where it's like non-EVM compatible chain with its own smart contract language, no chance.
We've discussed over and over there, where is Arweave's hardware support and who the hell is doing custody for that thing?
Where is it? Arweave is worth what? It's like 800 million or something like that. And everyone's holding this stuff on a browser extension with the JSON stored in like their fucking Dropbox. Like what?
No, I'm sure they're like the people holding like large amounts of them are not necessarily, hopefully don't have it on a hot browser extension, but
But I mean, you mean cold as in you've uninstalled and stored the JSON, or like what? How do you
I hope
cold
so.
store that? Oh,
Yeah,
okay. I think we need to get back to this topic quite soon, but I did just recently have a conversation with someone about Arweave, and basically the gist of the conversation was like, when are the bad people going to find Arweave and start just like filling
Ah,
it with
interesting.
junk?
When is there going to be like a web browser wallet attack on Arweave, basically?
No, so basically, the way I was thinking about it was like, when is someone gonna fill Arweave with dick pics?
Ah, okay.
Very cheap storage, permissionless for eternity, apparently. Did the Library of Alexandria have, a whole section full of dick pics, or was there
Strictly,
potentially some kind of
strictly
filtration mechanism?
speaking, the thing is, the Arweave nodes are not required to keep the entirety of Arweave, entirety of the weave, So it might be that if you were the one that got that particular dick pic sent, then your current node might be married to the dick pic, but then the dick pic or the address ends up in a ban list somewhere, and other nodes can refuse to store it if they want. Because in our week storage is optional. The only thing is that if by coincidence the system decides to pick one of the dick pics as the reward mechanism for a particular, call it basically a particular block, whatever the thing is in our week, then you're not going to be able to create it, so you don't necessarily get a reward for that particular bit. Right. But it's not like Ethereum where now you need to keep all the data because it ended up in a contract kind of thing.
No, that's true. So I think they have like basically they choose like, it's like random sampling of the history, right?
Yes.
And then they ask for a specific random sample, and if you can produce it, then you get to mine the block. But the point of that is that it incentivizes you to store pretty much everything, right?
Sure.
To
But it's also
maximize
required.
your likely. Yes, that's true. I mean, I guess you can do stuff locally then, but I mean, ultimately, right? Someone is going to be, if there's a reward for it, that someone's going to be storing it. So,
Sure.
should there be like a banned list on like protocol level consensus or something?
First of all, I don't like shoots. Shoots are imperatives, and there's no reason why there needs to be a global ban list, right? It's just if there is stuff that you don't like to store for whatever reason, you can easily create your own and then share whatever code modification you did and share the list, and then others can subscribe or not. That's how permissionless systems work.
Yeah, I mainly bring this up because recently I've been having a lot of fun, like thinking about hypothetical systems on Twitter where layer one consensus could seize assets and stuff, and a lot of my friends who are pretty like OG crypto and basically had heart attacks and been largely incapable of even like considering what such a system could look like because it was just so ideologically wrong for them. But anyway, maybe we could move on because this does relate to the Ethereum maximalism stuff in a way. And I think the way is basically like, what if whatever Ethereum's values are, if, for example, their neutrality, defending that neutrality is going to require a lot of resilience on the part of the Ethereum community. And at the same time, something that Vitalik argues in the blog post and on, I think he was on the Bankless podcast talking about the blog post, which was interesting because it's sort of like, how much of it was he like, this is what I think, and how much was it just sort of speculating in general. And I think another thing he's worried about is that like that a lot of outsiders, maybe crypto outsiders or probably crypto outsiders, don't like crypto because of the proliferation of scams. And I think Vitalik is kind of worried that scams are so commonplace that the crypto community sort of just accepts them. And so he sort of wants the Ethereum community to like come down harder on stuff like that, which is something the Bitcoin community does very well, right? That if you like from the perspective of the Bitcoin community, everything else in the world is a scam besides Bitcoin. So they're very good at that. Of course, there's
Yeah.
probably a middle ground which would be more accurate. but but
Yeah, and that
maybe there is an argument that the Ethereum community could be a little more aggressive on that front, because there are certainly projects which have been incredibly sketchy that haven't been, denounced as such. And Vitalik in part is responsible for that because he's been largely quiet on that front.
okay. If it kind of warms there. First of all, as you mentioned, the key difference with Bitcoin maximalists is that anything that is not Bitcoin is a fucking scam, and they're to just either rob you or enable others to rob you, right? Like maybe there might be a Bitcoin maximalist that doesn't think that Ethereum is a scam, but think that Ethereum abides scams, therefore is bad, right? So that's one thing. And the second is that I suspect that opinion might change pretty quickly on the side of Bitcoin maximalists if it turns out that we actually get a working Bitcoin level 2 that people can create arbitrary applications on, and then some of those arbitrary applications turn out to be scams. Because then it will be the libertarian permissionless ethos that pops up and say like, well, it would be wrong for us to put a stop to these things, because we're not a government. We're here because we don't like imposition. So I think that right now, basically, it is relatively easy to come out. If you're a Bitcoin maximalist, it is relatively easy to come out against arbitrary token scams, just because it's impossible for you to have that on your platform at all. So it's technically impossible. So I think that's, let's say, an easy position to take there. The tricky thing with doing this on Ethereum is that then who picks what to denounce? Is it need to be like the Ethereum Foundation? Are we going to get like a Ethereum morality police going? What if the morality police makes a mistake?
Well, I don't think it would be like a formal system, right? And in general, the way that the Ethereum Foundation has gone about things is more just sort of talking about them and trying to get the rest of the community talking about them. And so it's not like we're gonna have a list somewhere, an official list of the Ethereum scam projects, but more, when you see something sketchy, maybe the average Ethereum user could call it out more. But I don't know. This is tricky, right? Because there's a lot of projects from like the ICO days, which from my perspective, like started out scammy. It worked out, and now they're like not that scammy anymore. But certainly the first move of doing an ICO very, very early with nothing built was horrendously opportunistic. So,
Or,
like,
just the whole sushi saga, right? This gets us to one of the other topics that I wanted to go into, which is crypto being entrepreneurship from fast forward. Because if you look at the whole sushi saga, it would have been, if sushi had been a traditional company, let's say, a seed level startup or a pre-seed startup, right? Anything like this. It would have been something where the whole sushi saga takes 3 years to play out, maybe. And 4 years later, you want nothing to do with anyone who was even close to that time, right? But in the sushi case, it's this complete mess. It gets sorted out like in 2 weeks, and then it becomes an actual functioning project. And now how well it has been managed or anything else, that's a separate discussion, but it's clearly not a scam. It's just an actual project, just trying to have a horizontal approach versus a vertical competitor. Right? So you're going to make mistakes because you're trying to cover so much. So yeah, what do you do with that case, right? Do you say like, is this thing scamming out? Don't get involved. And then what happens when that thing changes 2 weeks later?
so I think that's a very good example. This is always the problem when it comes to these, is like, I personally want to be able to explore all the possible permutations of an idea. In the traditional world, that's never possible because you like have an idea, you patent it, or you just in general like have a lot of lawyers and money and go after everybody who tries to do anything. And so that it prevents that kind of exploration. And in many cases, if you look at like big companies, it's not clear whether that was actually the right implementation or if it was just the right idea and they got big enough so that no one could really attack anymore. And they, in many cases, I think we would have better products if we were able to explore those permutations. Now, it's not clear to me what the right way to do that exploration is, because this whole like forking thing does also have sort of a destructive quality to it. But in the case of Sushi and Uniswap, you have sort of like they're very different now, right? It started out as a fork of like a very basic thing. You could even look at Maker, Reflexer, like Dai as sort of a similar dynamic where you have like the same basic idea but implemented into different ways, and then we see what works, and I kind of like that aspect of it. The problem is that when you have like you allow for that by having everything be open source and like, in most cases permissively licensed, you then also open it up to all kinds of trolls where it's less of a game of let's try out a different permutation and more of a game of let's take something they've built, make a lot of noise, and then try to get out with a bunch of money, right? And so that the line gets blurred between those two things, and it gets further blurred because like sometimes it starts out as one and ends up as the other, and like the long arc of history, like everyone gets to be the hero and the villain kind of thing.
And for what it's worth, the part of that that I have a problem with is the get out with a whole bunch of money like 2 weeks later. I I agree with you that forks can be destructive, but I'd rather have forks than not, because I'd rather see how things progress. And precisely what you see, like this exploration, I am all for that. And this is to me one of those live by the open source, die by the open source kind of things. Uniswap wants to release this new thing under the business public license. Like, well, that's their prerogative, right? Just don't go around calling yourself open source. Like, yeah, we are gonna let you read the code license, basically.
I
And
mean, that was forked as well, right?
yeah,
So then what's the organization that sues and who do they sue?
indeed. And partially, I think that and remains to be seen. I don't have enough data points on this yet. So this is going to be like maybe we'll know in a year or two. But I suspect that purely legal tactics, like releasing your stuff under the business public license instead of MIT or whatever, I suspect that what the net effect of that is going to have more founders be anon, because you don't want to risk you grab the wrong bit of code, and then Uniswap that has more money than you is going to sue you, right? So that's one issue. And the other one is that if you actually want to protect people, then we're going to need some sort of reputation system while maintaining anonymity, because otherwise, I don't know, suppose that you have been running Equilibrium for a few years, you have all of this work done. If you want to release your next project as an anonymous founder, you're going to look exactly the same as a scammer. So
Mhm.
how do new entrants into the system know who to trust? Right? We're going to need some
That
sort of reputation built in.
that's very interesting. I had never thought of that from the perspective of like launching stuff. So sort of like on Reddit, you have karma, and it gives you some credibility when you post something. The same thing if you launch a project as an anonymous founder, you should be able to benefit somehow from other stuff you've done. But I mean, to a degree, you can, if you use the same like address to do this stuff or the same even like profile, you can benefit from your past projects to a degree.
Yeah, the
But it's
issue with
tricky.
that is that at the moment that lawyers get involved, big money get involved, and you want to sue somebody, there's going to be at some point like OPSEC is hard. And at some point, you will have funded that address from an exchange, and like disclosure might go to the exchange. Who knows, right? This things start getting dicey. So chances are that it's going to be easier to like, nope, completely clean wallet. I got one ETH to deploy the contract to Tornado Cash or whatever. Like, forget about it. Like, I don't want any mess here. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
I,
If you want to reduce scams, I think that we either need to stop fighting inside the community to stupid legal means and just pick the fights with the actual scammers, or we need some reputation system to distinguish the good anons from the bad anons. But really, is the anons with community support from the anons that are just randos who just showed up.
with a reputation system, though, if it's public, you still have this issue of like, in order to gain reputation, you get linked along the way to something. So, but what would be really interesting is if you could make a private reputation system and prove
A zero knowledge GP points, basically.
Yeah, that would be very fucking cool. And this is related to something we've been discussing in one of our projects, which is like, what does private governance look like? Where, you know,
Interesting.
nobody knows who anyone else is or what they're voting for, but we can prove the results. And I think all of that stuff is going to get very wacky here in the near future. Well, I don't know how much I can say about it because it's very early, but it's completely possible to do like sort of like Zcash style hiding of the computations, but in a governance context where you're counting votes and then seeing which thing got more votes, right? And you can keep that all hidden and prove that the output was calculated correctly. The thing is that it's kind of not like the first thing you want to do, right? You want to have something else for that system to govern. Like otherwise it's just sort of a moot experiment. But I definitely, that's sort of been on my mind for a long time, is like
But there are no
what does like a whole thing, like you could have, reputation, you could have all your like financial activity and then the governance. Like what if nothing can be seen? Like stuff gets very, very interesting. The same thing kind of that we have with Zcash and Monero and stuff, where you start to have very interesting sort of questions around like, how does one gain confidence actually that there's a certain amount of tokens, right? Like, and ultimately it's the same thing as with everybody else. Like somebody who knows enough mathematics can sort of like validate it, right? But for the vast majority of people, they can't directly validate it. Now, arguably, they don't directly validate that the Ethereum, blockchain does things
or
the way
or
they say they do.
or the Bitcoin coin limit, for all you know, most people probably never even being in the vicinity of a source code repository, never mind Bitcoins.
But this was a legitimate thing. Like this isn't so much a technical argument as kind of like a credibility trust argument. Like in the early days of Zcash, there was this big debate as to like, how do we know?
I
As
guess
far as I recall, the end of the debate was kind of like, well, you don't. And then
no,
that was it.
not really. I guess that the key difference between, say, the Zcash discussion and the Bitcoin coin limit is that the pool of people that could validate the implementation is smaller. Right? Like
For
I could
Zcash.
validate the bit for Zcash, yes.
Yeah.
But I don't have like the math knowledge to validate Zcash. It's going like, okay, sure. If you guys say so, awesome.
I mean, I talked to our cryptographer, Michael, and I'm like, Michael, does this work? And, and he's like, well, yes. And then he writes down a whole bunch of equations, and I'm like, okay. I have no idea what's
And,
going on, but all right.
and then you need somebody to validate Michael.
Right. You need like a translator of a translator of a translator, which is, by the way, the same thing I find with trying to talk about crypto with like the traditional world, is you need like this sequence of people. And then the last one in that sequence is able to like convert this talk into like it's an apple, right? And,
Yeah.
and they're like, oh, right, it's an apple. And I'm like, wow, I'd never think to say that.
Yeah. I keep bringing up this book because I freaking love it. And I think it's been a couple years since I've read it, and I probably should read it again. Anyway, called Blindside by Peter Watts. Sensational
Blind sight.
hearts. Blindside, yes. Peter Watts. Hard science fiction. It's hard to read, both because
Is it one of those science fiction novels which starts out with like the terminology is like seven
no, not
pages of terms
it,
that are explained?
he doesn't do that, and he has a really clever way around it, actually, which is that okay, this is not a spoiler, but basically the short version is that there's these characters that are going on a space trip towards what looks to be a first contact situation.
Mhm.
And like it's, let's say, four specialists and a weirdo. And like they're all really weird, but the particular weirdo in the group is basically a guy who's there to kind of help translate what's going on with these people, like what they're saying and what they're interpreting and what they're learning, to the people back on Earth who otherwise couldn't understand them. So that's one thing. And the way that he gets around the jargon thing is that everybody's wired and everybody has like AR overheads and the whole thing. So the characters, instead of speaking jargon, what they do is that the characters themselves probably couldn't understand each other. So what they do is that they subtitle each other in real time. So instead of them seeing some jargon, they already hear what the other person sees as the explained version of what the character is saying. It's really cool.
Interesting. I, I'm always a bit hesitant when somebody says hard science fiction. Like I love science fiction, but sometimes those books dubbed hard science fiction, like there's one book by Neil Stevenson, I think that I like, everyone online says really great. And I was like, okay, I start reading it. And literally like the first 4 pages are just terminology. And when I made the biggest mistake in this kind of book is I started as an audio book and I'm just like, okay, this is never gonna work. And then the story starts and it's just like, made up jargon word after made up jargon word in the first few sentences. And I'm like already completely lost as to what's going on.
Yeah,
But
that's
sometimes
different. He's
book writers are really good at doing that, where they sort of like the best sci-fi I think uses these custom terms for things, but the meaning of them gets like you understand it in context, and then it makes sense.
no, the issue with was is not that. It is there's two things. First, it has a huge conceptual density. So he introduces a lot of concepts and just keeps building and building on them. So that makes it, let's say, it's a book that demands that you pay attention to it. You're not just gonna like be reading it on the train while something plays in the background, or you're looking at a Bitcoin chart or something, waiting for it to reach your level. So that's one thing. And the second reason why it's a hard book to recommend is because Peter Watts's characters can be fairly unpleasant. So it's not the happy clappy science fiction kind of thing. So you have to be on board with the ideas and assume that yes, this people may be seven different kind of assholes to each other, but this is the way that the dynamic is working. So anyway, that's I'm trying to not say too much here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I will give it a read, and we can probably put it in the show notes as well. Somebody else wants to. Maybe we could jump into the optimism thing since we kind of did a bunch of Ethereum stuff, and then
Sure.
go from
I'm
there.
gonna let you
So
take that since I haven't looked into it too much.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I mean, one reason I wanted to discuss this was to get your kind of first reaction. So first, some context, optimism, optimistic roll up for Ethereum. Grand surprise, they're doing a token that must have come as a huge shock to everyone.
Yeah, I am aghast.
Yeah. Nowadays, every time I talk to like different foundations, like every foundation has 4 or 5 stories of like we were working with this team on this thing, and then they sort of stopped working on it because they decided to do their own token. And it's always like, yeah, 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 okay. So they're doing some stuff in an interesting way though, which I give them credit for. So number one, or like first maybe the system itself. So the actual system still uses Ethereum or ETH for fees, and the token is purely a governance token. So that I think is cool, and it makes it a lot more usable. So this is one issue I've had with a lot of the layer two projects is that if they use their own token for fees, like I mean Polygon being an example, it's not really layer two, but sort of in that direction. You need Matic to use it, and that creates all kinds of annoying things. And for example, makes bridging a lot harder, and it's just annoying, right?
Okay.
So having that sort of you can use ETH all the way through, I think is kind of cool. And there's not necessarily a downside to doing so, given you can still like collect fees, right? So like it's money, it's just not in your own token. And I don't know exactly how Optimism is going to do it, but like theoretically, those fees could go to a governance treasury that your token controls. So there's like just everybody, guys, just have fees and ETH, please. Anyway, so that's the situation. And then their governance token is interesting. The governance system has sort of two sides. One is called the token house, which is normal sort of plutocratic token based governance. And the other one is one NFT or one vote per NFT per person style democratic governance, which I guess they're going to use something like proof of humanity or Spruce ID or one of these mechanisms for. I don't know exactly. I don't think they've released the exact details of how that's going to happen, but the idea is that you have sort of this like democratic side of things where it's per person, and then you have this sort of capitalist side, and they direct, I think, slightly different things. So the democratic side directs sort of like public goods funding, and the capitalist side directs sort of optimism, value increasing funding, which kind of makes sense. That's one thing. We can talk about pros and cons of that in a sec. But then the other thing that they're doing, which I thought was clever and cool, is that they're doing a sequence of airdrops. Instead of just doing one airdrop, they're doing many. And they're airdropping to people across the Ethereum ecosystem who are doing what they view as sort of useful things for the Ethereum community. So they have multi-sig signers, they have DAO voters, they have, well, things like that. They added a list of different things that sort of make you eligible for the airdrop. And so this is sort of good for them because now that they're doing this airdrop and it's just the first airdrop, everyone's going to go do all those things. And some of them obviously are use optimism. Great. So everyone's going to go do that. But at the same time, it actually does reward people in the Ethereum community who've done stuff that ultimately hasn't really been rewarded in most cases, right? There's like I'm a signer on a whole bunch of different things, and it is annoying. It does take up time, and you don't really get any reward for it. So it's almost like a chore that you like kind of don't want to do, but some people do it, right? It's like open source maintainers. And so I like that general approach. And what you get with that as well is that you get governance tokens into the hands of people who you probably want to get governance tokens into the hands of, right? Like that group of people is most likely the most useful portion of the Ethereum community. So I thought it was quite clever, but we'll see how it goes. And on this governance side of things, I'm I remain skeptical about, well, all governance mechanisms until now. But what do you think?
Now I'm definitely going to have to read more into it. I don't want to shoot from the hip when it's too much. The separation of public goods versus actual protocol governance is interesting, but I'm not sure why would you necessarily do that. They have like the NFT before, because it might be one of those we need to find the use for the NFT things.
I guess it's just two different pools of capital that are controlled by these different. So if you have like, I assume fees or something, it's all a bit confusing as to where this money is coming from. But you like, I'm making this up, but this could be how it works. So you have fees, and they're split into two different treasuries, and one treasury is controlled by the governance token holders, and the other one is controlled by the NFT holders. And here, of course, the interesting thing is that I don't think there are any treasuries which are controlled by NFT holders that have been built to date, but I could be wrong.
You mean treasuries for projects other than NFT projects? Let's say.
Like, I don't think there's NFT governance as a thing in general yet.
Interestingly enough, Marinade actually just released its governance on April 1st, and it is effectively a token-based governance, but you need to. So Marinade has the MND token, and in order to participate in the governance, what you do is that you lock it into an NFT and then vote with that, and you can unlock it. Then you can signal unlock at any point, and then there's a 30-day cooldown. But it is an NFT-based governance, and if you don't want to participate in governance, you can just keep the tokens out of the NFT unlocked, and then just trade them at any point with no limit whatsoever. So there is that, but again, it is the voting is not per NFT count, is per token count that's locked into the NFT. So it's more what you refer to as the plutocratic voting, not the democratic voting. Which again, I'm not entirely sure how would you ensure that it is one individual, one vote on the NFT one. You could just have bought multiple NFTs, right? Or in the Marinade case, what happens is that there are like tiers. Okay, so Marinade has this whole cooking ingredient theme going on. The initial NFTs are like octopus, and depending on the size that you look, how big the octopus gets, which is more of a cute visual thing, right? But the thing is, there's no difference in voting between if you have, let's say, if you have 1,000 octopus NFTs and you just have one octopus with 100,000 MNDs, then both have the exact same voting power. Basically, it is the amount of MND that's locked in that counts.
Right. So I mean that's plutocratic voting, which is fine. I don't. Uh, it's so hard. Like I think there's just such big problems with all the different governance systems. I'm personally like most interested in some kind of meritocracy. I don't like. There's a lot of ways to break that down, and it's always a spectrum from like plutocracy to democracy. But I struggle to see, like, if you look at voter turnout, for example, in DAO votes, right? It's horrendous. Like there's constantly situations where things go through or fail to go through just because people don't turn up. Like that's why everyone keeps pretty low thresholds for most things, because people just don't come and vote, right? And so how is that going to work on the democracy side of things, where it's like next level? Like you need people, like you need such a large amount of people to show up to have any kind of like qualified, not majority, but like are you going to have, if your threshold is like 100 people, that's already a huge coordination issue.
No.
And like it's really low ultimately compared to what you're probably like the entirety of 10,000 users. So like imagine having a majority vote on something.
I can speak about what I've been seeing on the Solana side, because that I haven't been that active on Ethereum for the past year or so. The one side of it is what I saw happening on Mango markets, which I love. The project is a DEX with a full on-chain order book, sensational. Like it works beautifully, and the team executes really well. But one of the issues that I saw with Mango when I first started looking into it was precisely an issue of voter apathy. Like they were trivial, absurd proposals that should just have passed. Like user X, like Daffy, paid money out of pocket for some conference, right? Like reimburse Daffy for his, I don't know, $1,500, some stupidly low amount, and people just don't show up to vote, right?
Mhm.
This is one issue, one problem when you expect people to vote on every issue. I think that has gotten better. I haven't seen a vote that I would say was reasonable or important just fail through lack of quorum in a while. But I also haven't been looking too closely at it.
Well,
So just to finish the other side, the which is what Marinade is aiming to do right now, which I think is the best approach, and it's closer to what you mentioned as a meritocracy, is that basically the core team comes up with some a proposal of like, hey, we think that these are the things that we need to be able to move quickly on, and that shouldn't necessarily require a governance vote, right? And then you have the community vote on that, and basically giving the team decision power over those things. And anything that's outside of that likely needs to go to a governance vote, right? But
mhm.
before that, anything within these parameters, you get to move freely. Say, I don't know, an example would be, since you mentioned the public goods program, an example would be instead of requiring an on-chain vote for every grant, you just vote on creating a treasury of X amount of money assigned to these three keys, and then you can vote to revoke any of these keys at any time. But meanwhile, while those keys have been voted on, they can still assign money from the grant treasury. So this, I think, is closer to a meritocracy, and it would solve the issue of voter fatigue and voter turnout.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of like analogous to budgeting in the traditional world, right? Like you give some team a budget, and then they can work within those constraints. But what I mean with meritocracy is a bit sort of higher level in that, like, I would like to see a governance system where voters' influence in governance increases based on the quality of their governance decisions. And so this always gets into very tricky territory of how you measure and all this stuff. But there are some areas, at least, where measurement is pretty easy. For example, did this increase the value of the token? Now, the value of the token can increase based on all kinds of things. But if you go on long enough time frames, you start to get to something that I think could make sense. And I'm not even saying that's necessarily going to work out of the box either. I mean, it's definitely not going to work out of the box either, but I think it's something worth experimenting with. We've been sort of researching that in the vanilla DeFi project, but there's the hardest thing about these governance models I find is that you want to be able to experiment with them without locking yourself into them, because if you like, whatever governance experiment you run, if it fails, makes it hard for you to get out of that experiment, like almost by definition. And so it's very, very tricky,
Yeah.
which is why most people go for plutocracy, right? Because they can they have like some group of people who they know they can sort of coordinate to get out of a stalemate situation, which one might argue is not very decentralized. It's like this, veiled in decentralization when it's actually kind of a cartel. But there is, there's a valid reason for doing so, because if you really do have like if you if no but if only the governance mechanism can upgrade contracts, for example, and for whatever reason, like imagine just a situation where like the largest holder or something dies and they're lost, and that's why you have to fork. And if you fork, but the contract has USDC, then you're kind of, or die, you're screwed, right? So I think it's a very tricky area. One thing I wanted to mention though, related to what you were discussing, kind of like what Mango is doing, I guess, is the UMA team, Universal Market Access, UMA,
Mhm.
whatever. They've been exploring this concept of optimistic governance. And I think Aragon as well. And I don't know quite how I feel about it, but the basic idea is that governance proposals go through optimistically, but have a challenge period. So, and you can define the sort of parameters for letting governance proposals through optimistically, which means that, for example, in this expense case, like if that falls within the guidelines of the governance process, the amount is the right amount, the person is sort of the right person, etc., then it would just go through after 7 days unless somebody challenges. And they use like the optimistic oracle, which is Uma's sort of like a dispute resolution system
Okay.
at the end of that. And I think Aragon does the same thing, right, where they use their Aragon courts as sort of the dispute. Now, I know. So my biggest criticism of both of these things is like, why do you want to hand over your dispute resolution to this external project, right? Like in the Aragon case, I was talking to Louise at some point, who's the founder, and he was explaining this to me, and I was like, well, wouldn't I want the dispute to be settled by my own token holders and not by you guys?
That's what I was chuckling when you mentioned the Arangon quote.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think there's maybe, first of all, like there probably is sort of like a white label solution of the courts that they can provide at some point, which would be cool. Second of all, for just ease of setup, that might actually work because they have all their incentives built already to incentivize court participation. And for you, your community might just not be sort of set up to do that. For example, if you have like a very high throughput of governance proposals that are going through optimistically, you need people doing that almost full time. And so, maybe there's an argument to be made for outsourcing that side, but it feels scary to me to it's like
I don't think I
what
would
if the
start
court
there.
yeah, like what if the court decides, like, let's put in a proposal and it goes into dispute resolution because it's literally give us all your money. And then it ends up
At the
with
court,
the cartel that's trying to do it. So that's an incentive issue. But I do think that general idea of optimistically doing governance makes a lot of sense. One point maybe to highlight is that it the the reason people are doing or exploring that is because of voter apathy. And so there is some irony in the solution to that being a system which relies on people paying attention all the time so that nothing goes through automatically.
yeah.
But
And
but the point is that maybe you don't need everyone to pay attention. You need just one person to be paying attention who disputes.
could be. I do think that right now, at the very least on Marnit's case, the solution of like, hey, get blank check for things that are within parameters, and then have to come to ask for permission of the community for things that are outside of those is reasonable enough, because
Yeah.
it basically means this is the project charter. Like, hey, do you approve? Effectively,
The only problem with that is that you the blank check makes it possible to probably do transactions which don't have clear reasoning, right? And that's something that the optimistic situation solves for, is that
yeah.
if you don't, for example, provide enough detail as to what it is, it won't go through. And so I think that it's almost the same thing, but maybe it's like a slight iteration on it. But I understand why you would
It's
go to the
perfectly
marinade
possible.
structure as well.
And for what it's worth, the way that I'm insisting that this needs to be approached is, first of all, by an issue of observability. If you're going to have decisions being made on X, Y, and Z, then you need very clear dashboards so that anybody can come in and check the status of X, Y, and Z accounts and how things are happening, etc. So you need to be extremely transparent so that people can see that you're doing what you said you were doing. So that's my approach to that.
Yeah.
So for what it's worth, and I want to mention this partially. This is a bit of a tangent. I want to mention it partially because I feel that I gave synthetics no small amount of shit the last time that we spoke.
We get a lot of
Yeah,
projects, a lot of shit.
indeed, but synthetics, I beat with a stick, and I would probably beat them again if we discuss the particulars of the project. But when you mentioned the cartel thing, I think that actually synthetics had a really well-reasoned approach to turning itself into a DAO. Basically, like, who could stop the contract? What happens if somebody stopped the contract that shouldn't have done it? What can the community do? So I think that
But
that was
but they do rely on guardians,
yes,
don't they?
they do. But
This
what I'm saying is that, but
I have this is such I understand the practical reality that leads you to have guardians, but my God, is it ironic as well to be like, we have this incredible decentralized system, but ultimately we're going to trust these 4 people.
but the thing is, the community could vote to override this 4 people. That there was a good series of cascading mechanisms in case the 4 people misbehave or the community voted to do something stupid, right? It had a lot of good checks and balance. So I do think that one is worth looking into overall. Now, you mentioned the meritocratic governance of, if your actions have improved value to the community or the protocol, then you should get more governance power. And well, I haven't read the last of stuff that you published on vanilla, but from what we have discussed, I think that vanilla is one of those cases where this might be easy to track, because it's very easy to see from, you executed the series of transactions, or you gave this suggestions, and this actually ended up bringing money back in because of your trades, right? Whereas in a lot of protocols, say Mango, again, I don't know, you add a feature, and a year down the road, 150,000 other features have been added. Is it just your feature? Is it your feature? How it work with the others? How much should you get back? At some point, you're going to have a human making a call.
We haven't published on this governance stuff in the vanilla community, but we've
Okay.
discussed it in the research team. We've been slow to move on governance, specifically because I think it's so unclear how it should be done without causing a lot of harm to the progress of the project. But so I broadly agree with you on the fact that it's difficult to measure and quantify in a way that perfectly maps to reality. But I'm not sure that, like, even if it doesn't map perfectly to reality, it might still be better than the alternatives. So there's this gray area. And one thing, so this is taking from this book, I don't know if you've read it, Radical Markets by Glenn Weil or whatever his name is, but he talks about these voting
That should
mechanisms.
go on the show notes as well.
That's a good point. It's a very good book. I mean, it's sort of rethinking most of our financial structures and how we could implement them in a different way. And one of the thinking or thoughts is sort of like this, it's not a new idea, but this sort of voting mechanism where you get, let's say, 10 votes a year, and you can commit more of those votes to a specific topic than to another one. And so that has some good ideas. And what I would like to see is, and this is just my ideas right now for what vanilla DeFi governance could look like sometime in the future. But basically, I would like people to bet and sort of indicate their confidence level in something being a positive thing or a negative thing, right? And then you have some time frame. I don't know what that time frame is, with along which you measure against the token price. It needs to be long enough so that you like it just needs to, so the like pure market conditions are not the primary factor when you're making the bet, because otherwise it'll get skewed. And then you reward proportional to the bet they made. And so yes, you do have this thing of like, there are small features, there are big features, all this stuff, and it's not going to be perfect, right? We can't quantify, we can't map what gets what value exactly. But if you look at it as an aggregate, right, and you have these things that a lot of people have put high confidence in that they're going to be valuable, and you implement those, this is basically futarchy by Robin Hansen, just implemented in a specific way. I think you overall end up getting better governance decisions because you're forcing people to quantify their confidence in something, A, and B, because there's a return. So there's a financial incentive to be better. And so it's sort of inflation funded governance incentives is one way to think about it. Now there's a lot of tricky parts to this. One being, would anyone want to hold a token that has this sort of thing? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But I would like to see an experiment in that vein. I don't know if the vanilla DeFi community is ever going to do that, but I think it's possible that simply by incentivizing people, A, to participate because it's a financial incentive, and B, to indicate their confidence, you get better decision making on average than with a plutocracy or a democracy. And that's what I'm like, not perfection, but a better middle ground.
Okay.
That was a lot.
This again
I'm
could
sorry.
be a no, it's not that. It's just that I think this could be a cool topic by itself. And chances are we're gonna need to get back with
And
the
we haven't even talked about Justin Sun yet.
Jesus, and we're kind of like on the clock by now. A couple thoughts on that. It's not just is somebody going to want to hold a token that is going to do this. It's basically also an issue of is somebody going to want to commit to holding it for the long enough time frame for the decision period, like whatever it is.
Yeah.
The second thought would be that you're going to need to be really good at designing this so that you don't get a lot more confidence votes on a bear market and little voting on proposals as things look like they're reaching a top, right? So how do you quantify this? Do you quantify it, say, against your token price, against ETH or against USD, against a basket of things, right? Because if you do this on the bear market, yeah, chances are it's gonna skyrocket in a year or so.
Yeah.
But if you do it against ETH, at least you know, like, hey, it did better or worse than whatever my index is.
And the question of indexes is actually an interesting one in general. Like what is going to be in the crypto index? Is it just each native token of each platform is the index for that platform? I think that's broadly the case right now. But so if you took all the platform tokens and you did like, a weighting on them, on a basket of them, would that be like the pure crypto index? Anyway, other topic.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. This thing's interesting to explore, but it's like its own thing. Oh, and then you have questions, right? Like, are you locking this votes? If I put in, say that I have 1,000 tokens, whatever it is. First of all, do I get issue votes based on the tokens that I own, or do I just vote with tokens directly? If I vote with the tokens and I lock them in, do I need to unlock them if I can sell them? In which case, do I not get the reward because I already sold them 3 years on the road?
You
Or
wouldn't
if
be
I'm
able to
voting
unlock them.
Sorry?
You wouldn't be able to unlock them.
Well, what if I change my mind? Now I think
Period.
this is a terrible idea and I want to unlock them.
Too late. Got to be right the first time.
So
I mean, there's probably some mechanism by which you can allow people to trade the confidences, and there's actually some. I was reading some proposal from some project. There's way too many projects in crypto. Like it's possible. But there was some proposal. God, what was it? I can't remember, but the idea was that you kind of have this sort of continuous voting, like liquid voting on proposals, and proposals go through if they pass some threshold kind of thing. I don't know how that works in practice, honestly, because if the proposal is like deploy this code, then you're not going to like undeploy it. So I guess you just move on to the next one and you have like cancel, and I don't know, but that gets like there is a level of complexity somewhere where it becomes impossible to actually execute. And I don't know, maybe it's not here, but it certainly is somewhere. There's a ceiling.
I actually think that this is something for which NFT voting could actually work. because what you would do is that you assign, like, the NFT has a unique ID, right? And it's tradable. And so what you would do is that you would assign a certain amount of votes per proposal to the NFT. Once you vote, the thing is out there. And if you want to be able, and the NFT locks, like in Marinade's case, the NFT locks your tokens, right? It bundles up whatever tokens you're voting for, you're voting with. If you want to be able to recoup those tokens, then you burn the NFT and get the tokens, but that basically means whatever reward you would get from the votes is lost for you. And if you would get a reward, then it goes to the treasury because the NFT that was the key is burnt. And you could also end up getting into a situation where some bundles of tokens have a premium and you get to trade the NFT for more value than the tokens themselves are worth because they are attached to a whole bunch of decisions that have had positive effects. So you're basically not just selling the tokens, but you're selling the voting reputation attached to the tokens.
I'm not sure if I understood that correctly, but I think you can get to the same situation by just having tradable tokens and allowing people to trade out their positions. But maybe I think we're getting to the end of my ability to imagine things on this Thursday. Is it even Thursday? It is Thursday. This
It is
Thursday afternoon.
Let's actually open up the next call with this because I want to explore this idea a little bit more.
Yeah, we can do that. Should we just, because we have to close on some controversial statements made about some figure in the crypto space. So Justin Sun is launching a UST, a Terra Luna inspired stablecoin on Tron.
The guy is launching an algorithmic stablecoin where he said that there's a risk-free return of at least 30%. Exactly how scammy do you need to get to make statements like guaranteed return of 30% on a stable coin?
And also the USDD's algorithm will ensure the stable coin maintains its US dollar peg regardless of market conditions.
Yeah, like really, this is.
And first of all, what is this 10 billion of crypto collateral? Where is it gonna be? Where is it coming from? What is it? So there's gonna be a Tron DAO.
I mean, you could print 10 billion of TRX and then just have this crypto collateral.
So you don't think that Justin Sun is personally going to put 10 billion of his money into this project? Is that what you're saying?
As collateral?
Tron DAO will also provide custody reserves of up to 10 billion in highly liquid assets to serve as collateral backing for USDD. What is this highly liquid assets? Like, first of all, this is a DAO, so obvious, and it's on Tron, as far as I understand. So obviously, they're not going to be holding Bitcoin or really much of anything. And so, are they saying that Tron is highly liquid and they're just going to have 10 billion of that? I don't think there's any way in the world that you could liquidate 5 billion worth of Tron. What is the market cap of Tron to start off with? Do we know that?
No, I try to look at Tron as little as possible or it might infect my brain. Let me look into Mesari.
I think Tron is absolutely incredible. Like the inception of the project is basically Justin Sun copies white paper, raises a bunch of money, and then proceeds to copy all kinds of other stuff, not have a single original thought. And yet here it is, like something. So the market cap is 6 billion.
Yeah.
Where is this 10 billion coming from if it's not TRX? And that's fully diluted.
Well, you could print a new governance token for the DAO and then secure the DAO with the DAO's governance token.
So this, which is what Synthetics tried to do back in the day with their Haven project, by the way. We need more recursion, guys, more recursion. But like this strikes me as one of those moments, like there was that every now and then there's a company that will say, we're selling $1 billion worth of something. And where does this number come from? From nowhere. They haven't sold anything. They have nothing of value, and they're going to sell something, and they're hoping that someone will pay them $1 billion for it.
Yeah.
This has sort of a similar vibe. And what I find funny about it is that Terra has what, 3 billion? Sorry, I guess it's LFG has 3 billion, right? Like that is already like a metric fuck ton of money for someone to have. The Tron ecosystem does not have $10 billion worth of liquid assets of anything. Like,
But quite frankly, this goes back to the conversation at the start where you were saying that the Ethereum community, like maybe Vitalik is trying to get the Ethereum community to be more vigilant about warning people about scammers and whatnot, which is possible. But quite frankly, and I do think that, if you have a friend that's just getting into crypto, warn your friends about Justin Sun, right?
I don't even have time. Whenever there's someone who gets into crypto, they immediately come at me with like, "What do you think of Cardano or like XRP or whatever?" Like it, and I mean,
And at least Cardano is not Tron. That's the best thing I can say about it. But quite frankly, for me at this point, if if you just do a basic Google search of Justin Sun, anyone who's trusting this character with money deserves whatever happens. It's yeah. I'm sorry.
I'll say one more thing on this, which I found really funny. So according to Sun's announcement, USDD will be available on an Ethereum and Binance Smart Chain when launched via the BitTorrent network's cross-chain protocol. What?
Yeah, man.
Has he pivoted BitTorrent into a cross-chain protocol?
Apparently I had not heard of. So I guess that's the bridge now. I don't know, man. Really, like we shouldn't be giving this more air. Fuck that guy. It's a
Yeah. I think it's funny though. Like maybe I'm the problem. Maybe I'm what Vitalik is talking about because so struggle to believe that anyone would take these projects seriously that I like just find them hilarious. But turns out some people do.
I find the shamelessness and the brazenness worthy of, at the very least, slightly impressed look, let's say, because I really wouldn't think that anybody would get away with this kind of nonsense, and he does. Actually, you know what this is? This just reminds me of something, and I'm gonna say this in close because I have a call right after, and I need to, I don't know, go drink a bottle of vodka to purge Justin for some from my brain before it. But I met this character once. This was, I don't know, 15 years ago, and there were a lot of colorful characters going around Costa Rica. And I met this guy who had at one point worked for an actual scammer. The guy who was telling me the story was like an alcoholic who had stopped drinking. So he was like working for the scammer by at the time that he was drinking. And then he was horrified about the stuff that he had done. And but he was basically like, I told him like, hey, how does this work? Like really, these things are so fucking stupid that how do people fall for these things? Basically what happened was that he had a process and he sent out like this letter. And on the letter, he asked people to do something stupid, whatever it was, right? And maybe half did it and wrote back. And this was like a little thing, like maybe he wouldn't have made any money for this thing, but it was a little thing. And then on a follow-up letter, he asked them to do something more stupid. And he basically repeated this process 3 or 4 times. Those who reached the fifth step were basically the people he could scam because they would fall for absolutely everything. So Justin Sun kind of scares me as that kind of thing. Like, if anybody's already still following this guy, they're going to fall for this thing. They're going to fall for, I don't know, whatever else he comes up with after.
The richest, dumbest person is your target. Yeah. Well, enough of that. I'm sure there will be events before the next fortnight is up where we get more stuff to criticize and talk about.
Actually, let's start with the voting the next time because I wanna explore that idea more. So it's quite interesting.
Yeah. Let's do that. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Ciao.